I'll get started. We'll just introduce ourselves as we come up. Let's see. So I'm Steve. I think I know everyone here. And I will talk for the next few minutes just to give an introduction to what we're trying to do with the Church of Praxeology. So what is the Church of Praxeology? What's the idea here? Why are we calling it a church? And why are we calling it the Church of Praxeology? I'll answer the second question first. What's praxeology? Those of you who are involved in the liberty movement have probably heard this term before. And but for those of you who are not involved, praxeology is a very broad term that is used to describe any area of study that involves human action. So anything where you're studying how humans act, interact, how society is structured. And so you're probably more familiar with some of the subcategories of praxeology, including economics, history, political theory, sociology, psychology. These are all included in praxeology. So the basic idea of what we're trying to do here with the Church of Praxeology is start an organization, a community, where people get together and they talk about how humans interact, how our society is structured. With the idea that if we can get people together and start talking about these things, we raise the level of sophistication amongst the general public on these ideas. And we can start to reduce or maybe eliminate some of the problems that have faced our species for our entire history. There are many people who claim that things such as war, injustice, poverty are inherent to the human condition that we'll always have them. We reject this notion. We think these things have causes. The causes are bad ideas, and they have solutions. The solutions are to give better ideas to people. And so that's what we're trying to do. So from the highest level perspective, that's what we're trying to do with the church. Now, our operating thesis, and why we're actually calling it a church as opposed to giving it a different name, is that church has been very important to our civilization, Western civilization particularly, for thousands of years. But a lot of people aren't going to church anymore. And they're not going despite the fact that when you ask them about the functional components of church, they are generally complementary. So you say, do you think that the ethical and moral values that most established religions teach are consistent with what you believe? They say that it is. And you ask them, well, what about the kinds of community outreach that churches do? The idea of going into the community, doing charity, counseling, and promoting good values in the community. And they say, yes, that's also good. And then you say, well, what about like the social aspect of church? And don't you think there's something good about getting together with people who have similar values to you on a regular basis? They say that's good too. But nonetheless, they don't attend church. And we think the reason for that is because they take issue with the idea of the central core idea of modern established religions, which is this idea of a metaphysical being and a sacred text that serves as the basis for all religions. And so in short, they either don't believe in God or they don't believe in the God as it's described by these religions. And we even take this further and say a lot of people who do go to church, often we think go despite their objections to these issues. And so what we're trying to do sort of from a marketing perspective is create an organization that's structured in the same way as a church is structured, and that we have all the same functional components. But instead of having these sacred texts or this idea of a metaphysical being as a core component, we're going to take that out. And as you can imagine, you don't take the bedrock of faith out without having the whole structure collapsing in on itself. And so what we propose to replace it with are the basic ethical guidelines that those of us in the liberty movement know and are very familiar with. So instead of having a Bible or sacred texts that are going to inform our ethical message, it's the simple ideas of self-ownership, which is the core idea of the liberty movement, the idea that every individual owns themselves, owns their life, and is responsible for their life. And the corollary principle, which guide for action, the non-aggression principle. The idea that if you own yourself and everyone owns themselves, then you're not permitted to aggress against them because that's violating that principle. And so for this central idea, these central ideas, we hope to build this community. So you might be thinking, well, okay, that makes sense, but what exactly will church look like? And the short answer is we don't know yet because we're just getting started. But our idea is that the church will look a lot like most modern faiths. So functionally, they'll have the same components. We will have weekly services where people will come. They will, there'll be rituals. There will be you'll get some sort of sermon or sermons, and hopefully those will be engaging and interesting, and they'll make you think about things in a different way, and you'll be part of it. You'll be coming and seeing your friends, and you'll think about it throughout the week, and you want to come back. So that's sort of what the service will be, and then hopefully there will also be community outreach, just like normal churches. So we'll do activities in the community that will have a social element, but they'll also be promoting our values, proselytizing, helping the church people get name recognition for the church. And in addition, having this organization will give an opportunity for people to bring more people into our movement, because those of us who are in the Liberty Movement know a lot of times when you know somebody who has different ideas from you, you instinctively want to convince them, and oftentimes it can be somewhat combative, and then they go defensive, and you can possibly even lose a friendship. So having this organization is an opportunity to more easily soft sell the ideas. Instead of taking someone to battle, trying to convince them, you can just say, well, why don't you come to the weekly service and see what you think, and over the course of several weeks, hopefully, they'll start seeing things from our perspective. So there's that element too. So again, functionally, we want this church to be structured like any other church, but again, it's kind of up to what people want, so it's still open-ended. Now you might think, well, okay, that makes sense, but what is the message? What are you going to be talking about? And the short answer for those of us who are in the Liberty Movement, it's all the things that we are reading and talking about every day. But just to give you an idea, all the subcategories of praxeology. So history, we'll be talking about history. We'll be looking at history through the lens of the non-aggression and self-ownership principle. 95% or more of historical actors, the people you read about in history books, violated these principles. And we want to look at why they did that, why they thought it was necessary, how they got away with it. So this will be a part history lesson. Economics. We'll be talking about economics. The level of knowledge of economics and the economy relative to the economic activity is a massive disequilibrium. It's like Ludwig von Mises said, if everyone has to know economics because everyone's involved in the economy. If you have a salary, if you work, you make money, you spend money, you have to know economics. And so we will be presenting economics, the Austrian School of Economics. It's a subjective economics. It's qualitative. It's not boring or incomprehensible like the economics that you often get in universities or from the government. So it's a more subjective economics. So part of this will be an economics lesson. And then politics, or political theory, I'd say. Political theory is difficult for those of us in the Liberty Movement. There's a schism that exists. Some of us say that all politics is dirty because all politicians violate the non-aggression principle. And so we say, don't even engage it. And some of us say, our ideas are inherently political, and until we can get some political power, we can't change the system. And so they want to get involved in politics. I think that schism is always going to exist, and I think it's healthy. But there's a couple things about politics, or the political process. The first is that our ideas inherently are about splitting up political power. We want to shatter it. We want it to spread wide and thin, not concentrated. but power wants to be concentrated. And so no matter what party you come to the political process with, it inherently resists those of us who believe in liberty. And what happens is that sets people up for a disappointment, because they get excited about the ideas, they want to go get some political power to implement these ideas, to give people more freedom, and then they lose because the tables of the establishment is tilted against us. And what happens? You get discouraged and you start saying, maybe my ideas are wrong. Maybe I need a compromise. So at the Church of Praxeology, what we're trying to do is have this organization where you don't have to enter into this win-loss proposition, where if you win power, great, but if you lose, you're out. You can come and help the church, promote the church, work for the church, and it's an incremental process of winning, constant winning. It's much slower and more tedious, but you never get discouraged. The other problem with the political process is that even if your guy wins, he can obviously do a lot of good and give a lot of freedom to people. But he's going to eventually pass out of office. His term ends, he dies, whatever. And we're back where we started, which is most people do not understand these ideas. And so the idea of this church is to try to change people's minds, the painstaking and laborious way, which is one mind at a time, because that's the only way we're going to have a permanent change. And so that's sort of my introduction to what we're trying to do here. And I just want to end with this quote. This was from Murray Rothbard's The Anatomy of the State, which is a great essay where he just gives an outline, the essence of what the state is. And he ends with this passage. In this century, the human race faces, once again, the virulent reign of the state now armed with the fruits of man's creative powers, confiscated and perverted to its own ends. Of all the numerous forms that governments have taken over the centuries, of all the concepts and institutions that have been tried, none has succeeded in keeping the state in check. The problem of the state is evidently as far from solution as ever. Perhaps new paths of inquiry must be explored if the successful final solution of the state question is ever to be attained. What we're trying to do with this church is one new path of inquiry. For a long time, there have been think tanks who have done great work in spreading these ideas. And of course, there have always been churches. But as far as we know, there's never been an attempt to synthesize the two. And so that's what we're trying to do, and we hope you get as excited about the idea and support us. If you want to get involved more, let us know. And I think now, Gavin, we're going to do activity.
I'm Gavin. I think our idea was to have something to break up, to get people involved. And we're calling it Petitions. There's kind of a tradition that churches have, at least some denominations, where people will give something to the community, let people know something they think is important. Maybe something like the Festivus airing grievances is analogous. It's just a way to, I think, let people know something that's going wrong and ways that they might be able to help to support someone that's being wrong. And I'm just going to bring up an example. This is not something current, but several years ago there was a business called the Washington Sculpture Center. It's on Half Street between N&O and Southeast. They had classes in things like stone carving, blacksmithing, metalworking, and other art. They had just, this was about 2005, they had just upgraded their electrical system. Spent about $100,000, I think, because their classes were growing and they needed that power for torches and various things they were using. Right about that time, the city came in and that property was taken by eminent domain along with a lot of others, and that's where the National Stadium is. They were opposed to it, but they didn't have that support. There was, as far as I remember, there wasn't much opposition around DC for that taking. I didn't see. I worked in that area in the early stages of construction. There were protests. who see why something is wrong and why they might want to support it. So this might be a way to let people know something that's wrong that the rest of us can help with, or at least let a voice to it. And does anybody have anything you might want to bring up? Something that's current or past? You don't have to come up here. Just stand where you're at.
I can say something, I guess. So I have a small business, and just talk about recent things, I guess, fresh in the memory. So recently we performed a very expensive service for a woman. It was like about $3,000, I think. And she works on the Hill. Surprise there. Anyway, you want me to stand up? Sure. So I'm Jesse, by the way. And so she got into her mind that the service, although it was effective, she got in her mind that it wasn't. So at 5 a.m., this is in the middle of the night, so at 5 a.m. she's calling the Virginia Department of Agriculture, complaining before they're even open, before she even calls us. And basically we get called, we have to give her a full refund. The Department of Agriculture calls us and forces us to do this, basically because they don't want to deal with the hassle of her. So that's just something that we should just, is that going on too, you think?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not right.
She provided no evidence. The state was like, we're going to audit you.
Yeah.
And we're going to try to shut you down if you don't give this lady a refund. And she provided no evidence. There's no way she could even hide evidence that much time. But $3,000 for you.
Yeah, exactly. They threatened us with auditing and like continued harassment if we didn't like it. So we'll have her back. So we had to comply, basically.
Anyone else want to bring anything in?
It's not something bad that happened to me or in the news, but just a response to what I've heard, the two examples so far. One thing I've been doing a lot lately with the IRS scandal, with a lot of other things that have been happening in the news over and over again, is trying to use them as teachable moments to people. So even if you're talking with someone on the left about the IRS scandal, you can point out that the levers of power are there, and there's going to be a Republican administration sometime in the future. And sometimes they do understand that once these mechanisms are in place, they are going to be abused, and the right guy isn't always going to be in place. And there have been other examples, like when California did the tax increase back in the fall, and Phil Mickelson started thinking of moving to Texas, just talking to golf fans, not even making it something political, just talking to golfers and turning the conversation on taxes and incentives and that sort of thing. It's a very effective strategy to get people talking about this kind of stuff rather than just throwing up their hands. And to make the ideas known more broadly than they are right now. There's a psychological or a sociological term, I forget what it is, but basically the phenomenon is people tend to think that what is the status quo is more widely accepted than it actually is. So if you were in Jim Crow South and you weren't particularly racist, but you look around and there are all these racist institutions, you would think, well, I'm the exception. This is the way the world really is. So it's when people start talking, well, I don't really agree with that. And then somebody else starts talking. And the silence is broken. There's a moment when people will look around and realize, none of us really think this way. We've just been acting that way because we thought everybody else did. You'll see that with interracial marriage back in probably the early 80s. That's when my sister married a black guy from Atlanta. Gay marriage today, all of a sudden people just start talking about it. Everybody else thinks it just things break up. So I would encourage you, anytime you see a time, not to throw politics into somebody's face, but just a Phil Mickelson moment or something like this, take advantage of it in a gentle way that encourages a dialogue, not, as Steve pointed out at the very beginning, trying to shove the argument down people's throats.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Gavin, and I tend to identify myself as on the liberal end of the aisle, so I look forward to the dialogue. But I also do, very deeply believe in ideals like liberty, and so I'm glad to see this community building itself and looking for ways that it can grow. I thought of a couple of things. Neither of them necessarily recent, but we talk about studying human interaction and ways that it impacts upon use of power, use of freedom, and so on. I remember one of my sort of ideal shattering moments of my life was I had an internship in law school as a public defender in Orlando, Florida. And I was very pissed off and had that fire in my belly because I was so sure the cops were wrong in a case for a guy that we were defending. And now I'm older, I'm wiser. Maybe I look back on it and I say, yeah, I was defending a crack dealer. But it was the way the man was arrested that had me up in arms. The guy had come up with what he thought was the ingenious method of selling crack by keeping the rocks in his mouth. So that it wouldn't get caught on a pat down, right? And so the cops had been some police brutality, and they had reached into the guy's mouth without any kind of warrant or anything, and taken this stuff out of his mouth. And to me, as a young attorney, that was a clear violation of the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution. There wasn't a search warrant. It wasn't even any of the watering down of the Fourth Amendment that we've already had. They reached into the guy's mouth, and I was on fire about it. But when I talked to the senior guy who was actually on the case, who was going to be talking to the judge, and I showed him my brief, and he read my brief, and he told me he agreed with me, but he wasn't going to file a brief. And I said, well, what about the Fourth Amendment? And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, well, the Fourth Amendment's dead. That was just a huge shattering moment for me. The second thing that I thought of, because we're sitting here talking about running a startup religion of sorts, or a church at least, if not religion. Although one thing I'll tell you, for dialogue purposes, when people talk about religion, comes from the word that means a reconnection between people. So if people start saying, well, religion, that sounds like something bad or something I've got a stigma against. Religion or church is a connecting people, and that's what you're trying to do here. So focus on that. I knew a guy who started a pagan Wiccan church community and campground out in southwest Pennsylvania. And he had told me a lot of his stories of what he went through starting that up, including, because he's sort of out in the rural area, he had a local sheriff pick him up on no particular charge or anything, take him to his office. He asked several times, am I under arrest? The sheriff said no. Just think, can I leave? The sheriff said no, not until you let me know that Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior. Interesting that he would face that he would go through that that sort of subtle abuse of power. Well,
I do not think that would be.
But it's not. In that case, there was no physical force. I guess is what I'm saying. There was, it was abuse of power for sure, but it wasn't a presidential abuse of power, or it wasn't some grand headline news-making thing. It was a local sheriff being a bigot and being able to essentially get away with, taking 24 hours out of a man's life and scarring him and making him that much more cynical against, against. So that's my share.
Thank you.
stories, one just came to mind. My father's a rancher in Washington State, and there's a city called Moses Lake where he goes to get his beef butchered. And one day he was delivering the cattle to be slaughtered, and one of the cows escaped. And so they were trying to round it and get it back into the factory. And all of a sudden, people just started freaking out, and they all called the cops. And the cops come up, and they gun down the cow. And so because of regulation, because it wasn't killed inside the factory, the cow couldn't be sold or eaten or consumed, even by my father, right? He could have taken it home and at least eaten it because he knows it's good. But, because of regulations, he was totally out of about, $1,000 worth of beef. And the cop that gunned him down was like awarded by the mayor, not front page news headlines. And, oh, he's a hero, he saved us from this cow. So that totally is an inappropriate use of mistake instead of trying to keep safety and also the cow alive. And also, there was no recourse, right? There was no compensation for their bad judgment. So they can get away with stuff when they make decisions, when they judge themselves.
Anyone else have anything to share?
I'm Jared. I guess I'd like to just expand on what Steve said about usable moments. Things that are happening in the news or just current events. And one of the effects that I think is prevalent of government that we don't often consider is apathy. And it's always, well, we have those usable moments and we can use that for discussions, but then what do we do? And I think that will be great with this church is we use those usable moments and then can apply them. So as Justin said, maybe when that cow was gunned down, we could try as a church to come as a community and do some civil disobedience and go have a picnic and eat that cow. Or, something that we can use that as a usable, teachable moment, show the absurdity of what the state is. And as Steve said before too, if we can have constant, wins, then that will, I think, expand our community and really show just the general public how absurd the state really is. And I think maybe if everyone can just think, what can we do to keep the public engaged and not fall into the trap of apathy that government creates? That will be a really good benefit of the church of Praxeology.
Chris.
Yep.
Gavin. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Chris, and I get the honor today to talk a little bit about sort of my vision for the church and why I think it's just a necessity for us to come together as communities. Steve mentioned that we have 2 speakers who are going to talk for 10 to 15 minutes, and we can only 5 or 6 minutes. So don't have a lot to say, but imagine a world where people like us weren't forced into dependency on the state. Imagine a world where our good ideas could more seamlessly be shared. And imagine a world where we felt more secure knowing that not only more like-minded people like us existed, but we had formal ties to one another. We think this is a world that can be realized by drawing on the best practices from religious institutions, social clubs, fraternal organizations, and also mutual aid societies. So let me take you on 2 brief journeys. First, the year is 1930. The government-caused Great Depression is in full swing. Unemployment is soaring, and the government is consolidating power. What do you do? Now, in the second scenario, the year is 2008. The government-caused Great Recession is in full swing. Unemployment is soaring, and the government is consolidating power. Where do you turn? These may sound like 2 similar scenarios, but there are some fundamental differences. In the first scenario, people turn to their families, their churches, they turn to what we might refer to now as mutual aid societies. And through these institutions, people could help each other and find security in a sort of insecure world. Now, a lot of those institutions still exist, but they're prevented from doing what they're able to do in the 1930s. So in the second scenario, which is present day, 2008 to today, people still were able to turn to their families and to churches, but the ability for these organizations to provide any real help has been gutted by the state. Everything from licensing requirements to restrictions on providing services such as healthcare or daycare services, the rise of the welfare state with a bureaucracy that has the resources to propagate itself. And according to an article that I came across yesterday, there were laws called mobile laws that were put in place after the 1930s, which required aid organizations to increase the reserves and made it difficult to issue credit, so difficult for them to provide any service at all. And this effectively squeezed them out of the market, which led to sort of big insurance companies that we see today. So with all these restrictions, people abandoned their community organizations, which had dominated early 20th century life. Churches sort of, Steve made a good point earlier that people have moved away from churches because of sort of doubt in their metaphysical relevance sorts. I think that's true to a certain extent, but I also think it's true that people have moved away from these organizations because what those organizations were able to do, they no longer can do today because of the state. There's so many things that churches were able to do and similar sort of mutual aid organizations were able to do that they're no longer able to do today. So I think that's another driver that are leading people to move away from coming together as a community in churches. Now, us being a group of people who are cognizant of this and aware that this is in fact the case, I think we might be able to overcome some of those obstacles. So while I'm not advocating for us to go back to 1930, because that was a time period that there were other challenges in place, I do think we can forge a new path forward where an organization like ours can serve as a bedrock for creating a new and freer society. So I'd like to discuss just a few other additional reasons why I think building this community is important. Historically, communities have served as buffers against state tyranny. I originally intended to go through some of those examples during this talk, but I don't feel like this is the time to do that. That might be an opportunity for a future chat. But that's something that I also don't think I need to convince most of you of. As Jerry had mentioned earlier, having this community can really serve as sort of a launching point to defend one another when the state comes to harass us. Right? We'll have a community that can easily spring into action when we're needed. And I think of the IRS example, as Stephen mentioned, where you have an organization that takes your money and then uses your money to target people who are trying to get them to take less of your money. And it's really a frightening thing. But having this sort of community in place, I think, will allow us to come to the defense of one another when the necessity arises. A healthy community also serves as a tool to propagate good ideas, as Stephen mentioned. So allows people with a shared set of values to come together. That's what we're doing here today. We can build sort of traditional bonds between one another in a world that, while it's more connected through technology in many ways, maybe we'll disagree, our world is more disconnected. We're able to text each other and we're able to use social media to stay connected. But we often don't have many opportunities to come together like this. I think my vision for this community is providing those opportunities. We're able to provide moral direction to one another and to new members as they come into the fold. We're able to help liberty-minded people do well. This is something Justin had mentioned in the previous meeting. If one of us is starting a business or embarking on a new venture, we all get to know each other, we trust each other, and establish a sort of customer base right from the get-go. So we're able to help each other do well, just our normal everyday lives. I also want to talk a little bit more about mutual aid societies from the early 20th century. Because I think a lot of what those organizations were able to do is something that we're going to be able to do as a community. An article that I stumbled upon that discussed those sorts of organizations that really don't exist as they existed before. When you think of like social clubs today, social clubs today that are remnants of those previous organizations. Those organizations did all kinds of things for each other, where they promoted mutualism and self-reliance, and business training, and leadership skills, and self-control, and good moral character. I think those are things that we can do as a community. And finally, a strong interconnected community that respects the principles of liberty, I think is necessary in times of economic distress. But when I started talking, I talked about the Great Depression and the Great Recession and those sorts of things. Had two major times of economic distress in the past century. There's no reason to believe that's not going to occur again. There's no reason to believe that's not going to be worse than in the past. So I think developing this kind of community can help us prepare one another for the next time something like that occurs. The state has, in so many ways, taken over people's ability to come together and provide assistance to one another. Like I said before, they've gutted organizations' ability to provide assistance and in times of distress. And I think we can reestablish those sorts of institutions. And everything from shared services that a church would provide, from education to daycare, as I mentioned before, whatever skills that people in this room have to share, things that I can't even think of right now, that people would be able to share in a community fashion, or even a community center someday down the road. So, like I said, who knows what next challenged society will face, but I think this is something that we're better off doing it together. So let's forge a new vision for the future and the future of this community. So now I want to do a little something different. As Steve mentioned before, we had a couple activities, and if you've been to traditional church services, there's usually an opportunity for everyone to stand up and meet your neighbor. So I'd like to go ahead and offer up the opportunity to do that. So if there's someone in the room that you haven't met before, go ahead and stand up and shake their hand, and get started.
Steve and I are Liberty Toastmasters. I would just go down on the orange line on the wall.
I mean, I went all the way down.
Yeah. I brought the training here. He's right here. So one is going to get you on time. Basically, like, how's it going? He tells you the nature of it itself. He tells you and they go to basically just sort of and the liquids inside the drive and this lady was complaining. I work for a data storage company called NetApp. We do big storage for large quantities.
So we're getting mics. Is it evidence because if those mics were from that night, it would come a week later. I think she just had
on. Is that 123 and Cedar? Yeah, it's that kind of in a neighborhood. And, So I live, if you go east on Fall Lane, it comes to Electric Avenue. You turn right on Cedar Lane from there and just go to Route 50 or depending on the traffic, 5 to 10. So I drive by there all the time.
They right now some of them yet. what's the background?
I'm engineer by training. I do business development now. I grew up in Western Ohio, grew up on a hog farm, so stories about cattle getting out resonated with me and livestock getting out. Moved down here about 5 years ago, and engineering.
We actually we're not contracting, but our friend, my brother's friend, he owns a company in Boston, but he knows the GM. Actually, just met the client. He's a cool guy. Yeah, that's why I just had a meeting with him. That's why they're so they're cool. Because the GM is cool, man. He's just Irish guy, but he's very oh yeah, I think he came from Boston. But that's what's even the nicest hotels. I mean, that's why
it's not the only one.
He actually,
because
I've heard
hotels
something
they don't
about
want to take
this
responsibility.
Yeah.
4 months
Well,
or
this
so.
one, they
And,
Do you go to on the rocks happy hours? Okay, so one time he said, are you gonna be at Liberty on the Rocks? It was one of the ones that.
Justin is up, and he's going to give us a little chat about. So, Justin, you got the floor. Yep.
So who here is a little familiar with the ideas of Henry David Thoreau? Okay, that's good. So ideas are important, as Steve mentioned earlier, that ideas are what is the base for how we organize society. And so there's a segment where we might have a recurring segment called Leaders of Liberty, and we can kind of learn about where these ideas came from and who were some good examples in the early libertarian movement. So today I'm going to be talking about the civil disobedience of Henry David Thoreau. I was introduced to Thoreau through my high school English teacher. He was obsessed, and so he'd always quote and talk about Thoreau. So I began to read most of the works of Thoreau through him. And Thoreau, or my teacher would give examples of the economics of Thoreau, which is hideous in some ways, but Thoreau was an interesting guy in that he really only liked to work 1 day a week, even though he was really skilled. He was from a family of pencil makers. He crafted boats. He was a school teacher. Later in his life, he got really into surveying. So he had all these skills he could do, but he liked to work as little as possible and have as much time to focus on his hobbies of zoology and botany and just whatever. He was a nature guy. I guess the beer company Dos Equis used to have Thoreau as the most interesting man in the world. But he was very, like I said, a lot of skills. He went to Harvard. He could make the finest pencil in the world, and then once he made that, he said, "I'm done making pencils because I can't. Why would I want to do something I've already done?" Right? So maybe many of you are familiar with an essay by Leonard Reed called "I Pencil," which talks about how the division of labor is so vast that no one individual can make a pencil. But that's not true, because Henry David Thoreau. I guess he had some other weird talents, like he could reach into a bin and always grab 12 pencils out to wrap in a package. Like Rain Man or something like that. But as far as the ideas, Henry David Thoreau was very skeptical of government, and especially later in his life. And he was also an abolitionist, and he and his wife were ardently against slavery. And they even ran like a local anti-slavery league and offered refuge to slaves and stuff like that. So he died at the age of 44 when he contracted tuberculosis in Harvard. So it took 30 years or whatever for him to die. But that's when they eventually caught up to him. So he died pretty young, unfortunately, just before slavery was abolished, actually. So I think he died in 1862. So he discovered the concept, maybe independently, of opportunity cost. And it is an idea that economists talk about, like, what do you give up to do something else? Now, officially, John Baptiste Say, Bastiat, another French economist, Bastiat came up with the idea of opportunity costs about 4 years earlier, in another famous essay called Broken Window. And in the broken window fallacy, if you're familiar with, a kid throws a stone through the baker's window and shatters it, and the crowd gathers around and says, "Oh, this is good. It's going to stimulate the economy, and we'll have to replace the window." And then someone points out, "No, that's not true, because now the money you would have spent to replace the window, you can't purchase a suit from the tailor and that stuff, right?" So, in the writings of Thoreau, he talked about how sometimes a more simple life is actually more efficient because of what you give up. So in his modern day, he was writing about using the train as transportation. Sometimes it might not be cost effective to use the train, depending on how much you earn per hour. And so it might actually be more cost effective to walk to the nearest town instead of take a train, if you factor in like how long you had to work to pay for your transportation. So a modern corollary would be like maybe taking a slightly lower paying job closer to home, spend less money and less time in traffic and stuff like that. So he did a little musings on economics. In fact, the first chapter of his book, Walden, where he went and spent 2 years in the forest by himself, was on economics. And a lot of people criticize him for two things. They say, well, he's antisocial because he didn't like to, be around a lot of people. He wanted to be isolated. And that he is anti-materialist because he chose to live this very austere life. But those are both not true. He just chose to live a different way. He didn't prescribe it as how we should all live, right? And so he even wrote in reply to one of his critics, he said basically, "My life is merely an example, and if the coat doesn't fit, don't wear it." This is how, I'm not saying how everyone should live. I just chose to experiment with a different lifestyle. So Thoreau, throughout his writings, studied the relationships of individuals and the relationship between the individual and nature and consumption. He also studied the relationship between the individual and society. And the last thing he studied was the relationship between the individual and the state. And that's what we're going to be discussing today, in this third relationship. So on July 4th, 1845, this is actually during the middle of his 2-year retreat to the forest, the tax man came up and demanded he pay poll tax that he was overdue for 6 years, he owed him back taxes. And she refused as a matter of principle because he was against slavery and against the Mexican-American War that was going on at the time. So he was arrested in July of 1846, and the Mexican-American War started in April of the same year. So I want to give some historical context of what ended up being the basis for the essay that he wrote on his experience of getting arrested as a tax protester. So maybe not all of us are familiar with the details of the Mexican-American War. It was a controversial war at the time. One, and for the way that it was started, there was a dispute about whether the U.S. military was on their territory or not. The Mexicans refused to acknowledge the Treaty of Texas that was from about 1835, I think is when it happened. And they said that Texas was a sovereign nation and had the right to enter their own treaty And Mexico said, no, we need it from the federal government. But, so there was debate over that. Abraham Lincoln even said, show me the place where the battle happened, meaning that there was kind of questioning of whether, who was on which side of the line. And then there was the motives for it. The Whigs, the Northern Whigs opposed the war generally, and the Southern Democrats supported it. And this is ultimately because of slavery. The Southerners wanted to expand westward more, and they wanted the Western states to be slave states, and the Northerners opposed it. So support for the war was definitely not unanimous. It was controversial at the time. And the policies of Western expansion could be summed up in two terms. One is manifest destiny, which was the idea that President Polk had at the time, that we were destined to expand all the way to the Pacific Ocean westward, and also with the corollary of the Monroe Doctrine, which is that European powers were off limits to our affairs in Latin America, and Latin and North America, and that this is an imperialist notion that this is our territory, our resources. You Europeans stay out. We're going to develop these, and we're going to establish, democracy or Western institutions. And what's ironic is that in some ways, throughout the history of the U.S., these two policies are still in effect today. If you look at our expeditions to